Chapter 8. When Elspeth reached the city walls of Akros after her encounter with Heliod, she found a city on the edge of war. King's Gate, the main gate of Akros, was shut and barred, and archers on the wall aimed their bows at her as she approached. They allowed her to enter through the side entrance called Lateman's Gate, a reinforced corridor that led through the thick wall and was fitted with sturdy iron doors on either side. Once inside the city, Elspeth had to dodge formations of soldiers drilling in the entrance square. She spotted a young woman in the shadow of the wall watching the men in their crested helms and bronze chest plates practice the motions of warfare. "What's going on?" Elspeth asked the young woman, whose hair was fashioned into ram-like horns on the sides of her head. "Didn't you see the fire in the sky?" the woman asked. "It was an omen. King Anax is sealing all the gates. We're under attack." "From what?" Elspeth asked. "Minotaurs," the woman said. She looked incredulous that Elspeth would even ask the question. "They're amassing against us. They mean to slaughter us all." "I was just in the mountains. I didn't see Minotaur hordes." "That's not surprising," the woman said. She looked at Elspeth as though she was the stupidest person alive. "They live in caves." The woman moved on, and Elspeth turned down an alleyway to avoid the crowded square. She didn't want to spend another night inside a city that was about to go to war, nor was she ready to leave Theros. But she wasn't sure how to get to Miletus, or what to think about the god who had tried to kill her, even if he did think she was a thief. She didn't have anything she cared about back in her room in the foreigner's quarter, but she headed there to retrieve her pack while trying to decide what to do. "If you're so powerful, Heliod, why show me the way to Miletus?" The words formed in her mind almost despite herself, and she looked around guiltily, as if someone might have heard her thoughts. But everyone was hustling past her as if they had somewhere important to be. The roads were clogged with soldiers marching up the hill to the Colophon, the monolithic fortress of King Anax and Queen Cymede. Elspeth stayed to the minor streets, but there was no way to enter the foreigner's quarter without passing the twins. There were many shrines to Iroas, god of victory, but the twins was one of the few shrines that honored both Iroas and Mogis. The two gods were opposite in appearance. Iroas had the head and chest of a man and body of a bull. Mogis was depicted as a brutish minotaur. Acroan soldiers kept watch on the site around the clock. So many fights had broken out in the shadow of Mogis that people believed the site was cursed. Still, worshippers came, but they stayed on the cobblestones at the feet of Iroas. The god of victory stood proudly, nearly 25 feet high, with a shining bronze sarissa raised in triumph. The marble statue of Mogis skulked behind him. No matter where the sun cast its rays, Mogis was always seething in the background. Yet people still prayed to Mogis. He received the most attention after a savage battle when many Acroans died. The relatives of those killed would come to this shrine and silently pray because Mogis was also the god of revenge. Elspeth was just a block away from her room when she thought she heard someone calling her name. Given how few people she knew in Akros, she thought she might have imagined it, but she scanned the faces on the packed street and saw Jiro waving frantically at her. When he finally traversed the crowds, she saw that he was dressed as an Acroan soldier. "Why are you in uniform?" Elspeth asked. "Iroas has forgiven me. I've been reinstated as a soldier. There's a war coming." "How do you know?" Elspeth asked. "Didn't you see the sign of fire in the sky?" he asked. "It was a sign that you'd been forgiven," she asked, wondering how anyone could be sure they were reading the signs correctly. "No, it was a sign of war. I went to the temple and the priest told me I was forgiven. I'm reporting for duty at the colophon now."
"Oh,"
Elspeth said.
"well, I'm happy for you."
"They're going to empty the foreigners' quarter. I was afraid you'd be cast out of the city, but I found something for you. Arvid Takis owns the estate that was attacked by satyrs. He's sending his daughter to study at the academy in Miletus. She's traveling with the last caravan out of Akros. It's leaving in less than an hour from Wargate. They want a female escort, and I signed you up." He handed her a piece of parchment with an official seal. "This will get you in the gates of Miletus. Once you deliver the girl to the academy, you can do whatever you like. The city is yours for the taking."
"If you're so powerful, show me the way to Miletus."
Elspeth's head reeled. She felt as though she might start laughing, but she didn't want to offend Zero, who was trying so hard to help her. "The girl's name is Nika Takis. She's 16 and a bit of a handful, or so her father says," Zero continued. "You'll have to watch her like a hawk. They'll pay you on safe delivery at the academy."
"Thank you,"
Elspeth said. She took the letter and tried to find the right words to thank the grizzled soldier. "Are you all right?" Zero asked. "I thought this would be right for you. You can continue your search of the temples, though I hope your path leads you back to Iroas."
"Yes, I am. I'm truly grateful."
They embraced briefly, and Zero looked embarrassed. He smiled down at her. "When I think of you, I'll imagine you walking the streets of that great city searching for the heartbeat of the gods."
"Maybe we'll see each other again sometime,"
Elspeth said. He winked at her, as if he didn't believe it, and turned to leave. At the last minute, he turned and pointed to the east. "Wargate is that way," he called, and then he disappeared into a throng of passing soldiers. A street crier rang his bell and warned all outsiders to leave the city. Elspeth was happy to oblige. Elspeth left Akros with the last caravan out of Wargate. Behind her, the city disgorged the rest of its unwanted onto the rocky plateau. The stragglers unattached to the caravan seemed to hesitate, confused at the situation they found themselves in, and then scattered with the wind. Unlike the lost souls who had been cast out of the foreigners' quarter with nothing, Elspeth had an anchor. She must deliver Nika Takis safely to the city of philosophers. Unfortunately, the 16-year-old girl made it clear that she wasn't interested in having Elspeth as her watcher. The caravan wagon that Master Takis had hired for his daughter was by far the most affluent in the line. Most were just wooden boxes on wheels, pulled by a lone horse. Nika's caravan was painted crimson with gold trim and had velvet curtains covering the windows. It was pulled by 2 horses, and Elspeth was glad that her only responsibility was caring for Nika and not tending to the animals. The caravan master employed drivers and stable boys who would see to the rest. The caravan would follow the great river road out of the flatland and along the Data River to the sea, where ships would be waiting to sail them to Miletus. Elspeth had wondered why they didn't take a boat down the Data, until she caught sight of the river at the edge of Akros Flats. She looked down into the gorge, where the mighty flow of water rushed in white water rapids hundreds of feet below. Despite the distance, the echoing roar of the water drowned out the squeak of the wagon wheels. Nika leaned out the window to look down at the river and caught Elspeth's eye. She jerked the curtains closed, as if Elspeth had been spying on her. When Elspeth was 16, she trained day and night to become recognized as a Knight of Bant. She never would have treated an elderly so rudely. She never would have disregarded someone who had been sworn to protect her. She tried to imagine what the most difficult thing in Nika Takis' life had been so far, and then she realized it was probably this journey, being sent away from her parents. Today may well be the toughest day she'd ever experienced. It had been a mad rush in the last moments before the caravan departed. Nika refused to say goodbye to her father, and she climbed into the wagon and slammed the door. "She feels like we're punishing her," Master Takis told Elspeth. "But this is for her own good. After what happened at the estate, well, you saw it yourself. The oracles say that evil is stirring in Akros, and I want my daughter well away from it. You will take care of her, yes?"
"Yes, sir,"
Elspeth said. "Don't let her out of your sight unless she is inside the caravan, and you are guarding it," he said. "Don't let her fraternize with men. She can be willful, and I should warn you, she's very clever." Elspeth frowned.
"Clever how?"
But the horn blasted from the wall, and the wooden doors of Wargate swung wide, and so Master Takis didn't have a chance to tell her. As the caravan rolled out, Master Takis ran up to the gate. The soldiers held him back, but he shouted, "Don't let her kneel at shrines! Don't let her talk to people who say they are priests!" Soon the line of wagons began the descent off the Akros flats and to the rugged mountains. The caravan master rode the line, checking on the wagons. He was an ebony-skinned man with a clean-shaven head and enviable muscles. He only came up to Elspeth's shoulder, but he was twice her width, and there was not an ounce of excess flesh on him. She could imagine him easily hoisting up the back of one of the wagons to swap out a wheel, if necessary. When he reached the end of the line, he dismounted and walked beside her. "My name is Guinness," he said. "I've run this route for 15 years, and I know all the trouble spots. Master Takis explained your task. Come to me if you have problems." Elspeth assured him that she would. "The next few hours are the trickiest to navigate. It's ambush territory in those narrow canyons and passes, and you might want to walk on the right side of the caravan. Stay on the left, and you may get knocked off the edge and into the Data." Guinness mounted his horse and rode back up the line. Elspeth wondered if Nika had heard his warning, but the velvet curtains were decidedly closed, and Elspeth made no attempt to speak to her charge. The iron wheels rattled slowly down the steep grade for an hour as the sun crested in the sky. Dark shapes circled high above them, but Elspeth had dismissed them as large birds. She forgot them entirely when she saw the next obstacle. The road seemed to narrow dramatically to just a few inches to spare on either side of the caravan. With no room to walk on either side, Elspeth was forced to move to the very end behind the caravan, where she didn't feel as if she was going to fall off into the river gorge or be crushed against the mountainside. The driver shouted down the line, "Halt!" and the caravan stopped abruptly. The road was too narrow for Elspeth to see what was happening. As shouts of alarm rang from wagon to wagon, she realized they were under attack. With nowhere else to go, she climbed on top of the wooden roof of the caravan and saw that many of the stable boys had done the same. They were armed with bladed poles, apparently the defense of choice against the raiders from the skies. The dark shapes bore down on them. When the creatures flew closer, Elspeth saw that they had ugly humanoid faces and talons on their back feathered wings. When the creatures flew closer, Elspeth saw that they had ugly humanoid faces and talons on their black feathered wings. One swooped down near Elspeth, and it circled away. Part avian and part human, the foul creatures had emaciated torsos and yellow splintered teeth. Guinness bounded between the gaps between the wagons as he sprinted down the roofs toward her. Her driver was with the horse, trying to keep it calm. If it spooked, their wagon would topple off the side and fall into the raging river. "Harpies!" Guinness yelled. She realized that he was coming to help her, the only wagon with a single defender. The harpies hit the front of the line first, and they flapped away with chests, amphorae, or other supplies hooked in their talons. They seemed to be more interested in stealing the supplies inside the merchants' vans than killing. Elspeth readied her spear blade as Guinness skidded to a halt beside her.
Are they scavengers? She asked.
Yes, but this is strange, he said. They usually avoid caravans with this many defenders. 2 harpies swooped at them at a high rate of speed. There was coordination to their attack, Elspeth realized, as she crouched low and braced herself for impact. She would hear the horse nicker in fear, and the van lurched forward under their feet. Steady! Guinness shouted. After Heliod transformed her sword into the longer blade, Elspeth was afraid she wouldn't be able to wield it with the same competence. But with her first strike against the diving harpy, she knew her skills weren't impaired. The elongated blade was no heavier than her original sword, but it seemed to strike even harder than before. Between the speed of its ascent and the swing of her weapon, she cleaved the creature nearly in 2. It thudded onto the top of the wagon with a wet smack. Below her, inside the caravan, Nika shrieked at the sound.
Stay inside,
Elspeth commanded her ward through the roof. She shoved the carcass off with her foot, and it went spiraling off the side of the cliff and down to the river. Guinness grinned at her with approval. You could reach all the way to Nyx with that blade, he shouted as 2 more harpies wheeled toward them. One of the harpies circled above her, staying just out of reach. Then it made a strange, jerky grab for Elspeth's blade, with the razor-sharp talons on its feet. The motion was so unexpected that Elspeth lost her balance and fell backward off the back edge of the wooden roof and onto the road. She managed to land on her feet, but she dropped the weapon. With terrifying speed, the harpy shot directly at her. Elspeth lunged for the blade, but the harpy was faster. No longer reaching for her blade, it aimed its talons at her eyes. Behind the harpy, Nika threw open the door of the caravan and hurled a ceramic jug at the creature. The ceramic cracked against the harpy's skull, and lamp oil drenched its wings. The harpy thudded to the ground, whirled around, and screamed at Nika. The screams sounded like some guttural language, but not quite like any words that Elspeth had ever heard. The harpy lunged toward the wagon, but Nika grabbed another jar and threw it at the harpy's face. It hit its mark directly, and this time, the harpy had enough. It went careening into the air, dripping oil and screaming its ugly words. As it flapped jerkily into the air and out of sight over the ridge, the rest of the harpies followed.
Good aim, Elspeth said, grabbing her blade. She scanned the sky for more airborne marauders. Was it saying something? Can those things speak? Oh, it's going to tattle to Erebos, Nika said. It's also said unkind things about my face and your blade.
Elspeth gave Nika a funny look, not sure if the girl was joking or not. Guinness appeared above them on the top of the van. All accounted for? He asked. We better get moving if we're going to make the campsite before nightfall.
If you see Beta, tell him I'm all right, Nika called after the caravan master, but she received no answer. Who's Beta? Elspeth asked. None of your business, Nika snapped, and she slammed the door on the caravan in Elspeth's face. After the harpy attack, the caravan rolled on without stopping. The great river road widened, and Elspeth walked on the right side of the wagon, happy to have a better view of what was coming. The driver called back that they were just a mile away from the campsite, and Elspeth was relieved. It had been a long time since she'd walked this far. She felt a strange sensation in her mind, almost like an itch she couldn't scratch. A mage was casting, but it was a weak spell, as if it originated from far away. Elspeth cast her own in response, both strengthening herself and metaphorically swatting away the intrusive magic, like someone swatting away an annoying insect. But she felt uneasy, as if someone was watching her. The velvet curtains moved, and she caught a glimpse of Nika moving back from the window. The sun was setting when the caravan stopped in a sheltered valley between 2 high cliffs. Guinness directed the drivers to roll the wagons into a protective circle, and his men built a bonfire. Elspeth offered her help to Guinness, but he politely refused. When the fire was blazing, Nika hopped out of the wagon. Her appearance had changed since they left Akros. When she entered the wagon under the protective eyes of her father, her black hair was loose on her shoulders, and she wore a long hooded cloak.
Now her hair was braided and held in loops by an expensive-looking gold clasp, and she discarded her cloak despite the chill in the evening air. Every man in the camp, which was everyone besides Elspeth, turned their eyes on the young woman. Nika circled the line of wagons as if looking for someone. When she didn't find what she was looking for, she climbed back into the wagon and slammed the door. Elspeth shared soup with the others around the bonfire, keeping an eye on Master Takis's wagon, but there was no sign of the girl. When the sun disappeared behind the ridge, she took a bowl to the wagon, but when she opened the door, it was empty. Nika must have climbed out of the window on the far side of the wagon. Elspeth's heart sank. The stroll around the campsite had been a show all along.
"Have you seen the Lady Takis?" Elspeth asked, as she searched the campsite, but everywhere the answer was the same. People shook their heads and refused to meet her eye. Elspeth wasn't sure if they avoided her because they knew something or because she was a stranger. Elspeth had done her best to disguise her otherness. Her skin was deeply tanned, and she managed a small glamour to make her eyes appear darker. But people seemed to instinctively mistrust her, to know that she was different. She heard a man muttering about citizens in her passing. Finally, after Elspeth had made the rounds through the camp several times, she went to see Guinness. By now it was dark, and Elspeth had heard enough stories about the murderous bandits and savage minotaurs roaming these rocky highlands to begin to fear for Nika's safety. Unlike the rest of the men, Guinness didn't seem to have any problem with Elspeth. When she approached him and asked about Lady Takis, he simply stood up and walked with her to the edge of the camp. They took a small trail up the side of the ridge to the mountain of a small cave. "Youth," he said derisively. Then he picked up a medium-sized stone and threw it into the entrance. They heard a yelp and then frantic whispering. "If he's one of mine, he'll be whipped," Guinness assured her. But when Nika and the boy emerged, it was the son of one of the merchants from Akros. He wasn't much older than Nika, and looked like he wanted to die there on the spot. Guinness led him back to the camp, while Nika stared defiantly at Elspeth. "Do you even know him?" Elspeth asked. "What's that got to do with anything?" Nika asked. "You can do whatever you like when you get to Miletus, but your father entrusted you to my care, and until then, you need to stay in the wagon." "Or what?" Nika asked.
It was a very good question. Elspeth didn't have many ways to coerce the girl into behaving. Elspeth decided to go with a threat.
"Or I'll leave you on your own, and you can pray the Minotaurs don't get their hands on you."
She wasn't sure that it would have much impact, but the girl glanced around nervously.
"All right,"
Nika said, moving closer to Elspeth.
"You made your point. I'll stay in the wagon."
At first, Elspeth thought the abrupt change was a ruse, but the girl seemed genuinely scared. She went inside the caravan without protest and unrolled her sleeping mat. Elspeth left the doors open and sat at the back, her feet dangling over the side, and watched the valley transform under the shifting light from Nyx. The heavenly images of gods and celestial creatures captivated her. She couldn't believe that such a spectacle played out night after night. No wonder the people of Theros had such a firm faith. They saw their gods in action every time the sun hid behind the horizon.
"Do you know the story of Califa?"
Nika asked, crawling out of her bedroll and sitting beside Elspeth. Elspeth shook her head. Nika seemed friendly, like she was eager to talk. It was all extremes with this girl.
"They don't tell god stories in Setessa?"
Nika asked. Elspeth didn't know much about Setessa, except that it was a polis located somewhere in the vast Nezian forest. She wasn't sure why everyone thought she was from there.
"I'm not from Setessa," she said. "Who is Califa?"
Nika pointed at a section of the sky where a lithe figure seemed to swim through the stars.
"Califa was the greatest mariner who ever lived. She sailed a ship she called the Monsoon, and was the first mortal to decipher the secret patterns of the winds. Theros grew jealous that a mortal should navigate her realm so easily, so she challenged Caliphate to a race along the waterfall at the edge of the world. "There is a waterfall at the edge of the world?" Elspeth asked without thinking. Nika whipped her head around and stared at Elspeth in surprise. "You don't know that? Where are you from?" "I was raised by Leonins," Elspeth said. She'd meant it as a jest, but she'd never been very good at humor, and Nika took her seriously. "Oh, is it true they ate babies?" Nika asked. I never saw that," Elspeth said. She had no idea what Leonins on this plane ate. Hopefully, it wasn't human babies. "Go on about the mariner. If Caliphate won the race, then she would have the run of the ocean and Theros wouldn't bother her. But if she lost, she could never set to sea again. The race began, and Caliphate was actually winning. Theros sent sirens to slash her sails, but still she hung on to the edge of the world and kept sailing. So Theros sent a wind to blow her off the waterfall. No ship can sail over the side and not be destroyed, but Caliphate was too clever for the god of the sea. The mariner went sailing over the waterfall, but instead of being dashed into oblivion, she sailed into Nyx itself." Nika pointed to a cluster of stars high above them. "Look, you can see her ship." "Oh, and Nylea is worried." "How do you know?" Elspeth asked. "That's her lynx, and you can tell by how it moves. It's looking for something. Something bad is about to happen." "Can you tell what?" Elspeth asked. "Beta says that Polukranos has broken his chains. He says the Hydra will smash Miletus, and I will be crushed to death if I let you take me there." "Is Beta your friend?" Elspeth asked. "He loves me," Nika retorted, the edge back in her voice. "All right," Elspeth said. She wasn't going to argue with Nika about the nature of love. "Who is Polukranos?" "Well, Polukranos is the greatest Hydra to ever roam the mortal realm. Porphyros' sword cut him from Nyx, and he became mortal on the way down." "Well, if he's mortal, and he can be killed, then there's nothing to worry about," Elspeth said. Nika scrunched her face doubtfully. "You don't know much about Hydras, do you? You have to chop their heads off all at once, and Polukranos has 50 of them. Beta said it took 3 gods just to bind him to the earth." "Maybe Beta was misinformed," Elspeth said as the starry lynx dashed out of view. "He does love me," Nika said. "I hope we're talking about the boy and not the Hydra," Elspeth said, and Nika laughed. "Have you ever been in love?" Nika asked. "No," Elspeth said. "Why? You're young and beautiful, although I guess growing up in a Leonin camp." "It's getting late. Maybe you should go to sleep." "Yeah, I'm really tired," she said. Elspeth watched Nyx until she was sure the girl was sleeping. At the edges of the sky, it did look like the waterfall that Nika had told her about. Stars cascaded down and flowed out in unseen currents along the horizon. To the east, the figure of a hooded man bent low as he searched the world. A long cord like a whip slashed at him from nowhere, but it didn't harm him. Instead, he grabbed it and wrapped the end around his hand. On the other side of the sky, a celestial lion and cub frolicked together. Elspeth felt content as she watched the shifting colors and stellar light. Despite the earthly dangers, this world seemed safer, brighter. What could corrupt the heavens? At the edge of sleep, Elspeth realized she was praying to Heliod. She used to pray to the angels of Bant each night, and now she found herself thanking Heliod for another day without pain and grief. There'd been obstacles, but nothing she couldn't overcome. The prayer felt automatic,
like breathing. She curled up tighter and imagined Nyx to be like a shield around the plane and the gods, the guardians of all, including herself.